I'm Tom GRIER, and I oversee real estate investment banking at JP Morgan. And it's my pleasure here to be here today. And our discussion today is really about business models. And we're going to bring technology into that discussion and how technology has impacted business models and how owners and operators are thinking about their business as a result of technology. And one thing that I have one slide without a disclaimer. I'm pretty risky. This slide shows how powerful this little device is. And this is, I think, the device that we all live with, work with, and play with. And it is actually impacting their business every single day. And I think there's a very smart person in Omaha who has made a big investment in this little device. And I think he truly believes it's a sustainable long-term. It will have long-term impact well into the future. What this slide shows is just the growth of mobile phone subscriptions, pretty simple, from 56 million 25 years ago to over 8 billion today. And what I also added the performance of the REITs versus the S&P. And one thing that I think I've noticed is I think our management teams in this sector have done a terrific job in taking on this challenge of rapid change as a result of technology. And if you just look at the total return of the REITs in general, well above the S&P, and I do think the REITs and the real estate companies are well equipped to take on the challenges that this device presents every single day. So with that, I believe our panelists have been introduced. I can do a very quick introduction and then get right to it. To my immediate right is Scott RECHLER. Scott is the CEO of RXR Realty. Scott was the CEO of Rex & Associates, which was sold in 2007. A terrific result as a public company. Scott was the vice chairman of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, oversaw a $30 billion budget. I think there's some terrific insights with respect to what's going on in New York and the transformation of New York from a technology perspective. Importantly, I believe RXR has about $20 billion of AUM, primarily here in New York. Next to Scott is CONOR FLYNN. CONOR is the CEO of Kimco, shopping center REIT, as most of you know. To CONOR's right is Don Wood. Don has been the CEO of Federal since 2002, with a particular expertise, from my perspective, in mixed-use urban development. Santana Row certainly comes to mind. I do remember that back in the early 2000s. I think we were talking about single-digit yields.
It burned down.
Yeah. I think we were talking about single-digit yields at that point in time, and what a success it really has been. And there's a number of others since then. And then to Don's right is Mark PARRELL. Mark is the CEO of EQR as of January of this year. And he's been part of that C-suite that saw a transformation of the company over the past 10 years. And so we're glad to have each of you with us to talk about your business models and the impact of technology. And certainly the future is mixed. So what I think what I'll do is just start with a question for each of you. And that is kind of melding in this notion of technology. Customer behavior certainly has been influenced by technology. That's impacted your business and your business models. How has it impacted your business models and your approach to what you do day in and day out? So maybe I'll just start with Scott and kind of work down the line here.
Sure, thank you. I think what's interesting, you focus on the iPhone. Our customers today have an expectation of having a level of bespoke service and having us having a better insight as to what they want before they want it. And I think the whole industry has shifted. And if you think about online retail, right, they've realized to be successful, they not only need an online presence, but they also need a physical presence. So Amazon goes out and buys whole food. I think the same is true with us in the physical world. For really to better service our customer, we need to complement our physical space by using a digital world and interaction to better understand their needs and customize the services that we provide. And so I think that and I think you had some of the discussion in the panel earlier, if you take a lens to the future of real estate, it's not going to be just about the four walls that we build and then we lease it out. It's about how do we activate what happens within those four walls? How do we merchandise the space? How do we think about the types of services and understanding the changing dynamics of our customer day in and day out to be more dynamic ourselves in response to those changing needs. So I think it's bringing us to where space is a service rather than just us providing space, and changing the nature of our business as much more of a full-time activation and engagement with our customer, and learning from our customer. And as technology changes, forcing us to change on a much more regular basis. And one of my favorite sayings is regularly recalibrate reality, because what was true yesterday is likely not to be true today, and clearly not going to be true tomorrow. So understanding what your customers' needs are to guide you to change your business more fluidly also is a key.
So for Kimco anyways, I think probably technology has impacted retail more than any other sector. And that pace of change, I think, is something that we have embraced, understanding that you no longer can be you no longer can be a landlord and just sit back and collect rent checks. You really have to be engaged. You have to understand not only where retail is headed, but you also have to understand the consumer and what they demand and how they're shopping. And so when you held up the iPhone there just a few seconds ago, that's what we think has dramatically changed the front door of the business. Now retail is no longer, I think, a store with a front door that we're normally used to. And now the front door is the iPhone. And when you look at how we've transformed the portfolio, we had the strategic vision to say we're oversupplied as a country, but yet there are pockets of this country where the supply and demand balance is very much in balance, and we think that the real estate value is underutilized, and we can unlock that value through mixed-use redevelopment. And so when we look at technology and how it's impacted retailer, it's very much changed the dynamic of how they service their customer. But as Scott mentioned earlier, we're seeing how the future of retail is evolving by utilizing that physical brick and mortar space to enhance the experience. And that's really what we have seen with the retailers that are forward-thinking and embracing technology, that they can utilize that physical store footprint to enhance the offering by laying on top of that the e-commerce business, looking at their logistics, how do they service their customers. Everybody wants it immediately. They also want it conveniently, and convenience is the factor that we point to that really is working for the shopping center today.
You're texting.
Did the Yankees win last night?
The Yankees just barely lost to the Tigers yesterday. The final score was 3-1.
Know what that's about? That's not only a disruptor to the retail business, which we hear about every 7 minutes of every single day, and why in the world would you invest in retail? You know, it's so funny. I've been sitting here through most of the day, in and out, incompletely for your presentation, Deb, by the way, the whole time. But I will say that every business has been disrupted. And that pace of change is real, and it's sure not stopping now. And you know what that silly thing just did? What that really means, not just to millennials, but to middle-aged people, old people, young people, everybody. What that says is you now require a level of service that was not possible 5 years ago. And you require that in everything that you do, whether you know it or not. You ask for things, you demand things, and time frames, all that kind of stuff. Not even possible 5, 7 years ago. Efficiency. When you think about efficiency in life, do you think traffic is a new thing? There's been traffic for a very long time. We've just become a whole lot less patient with sitting in it. And so the demand for efficiency, which has brought, from my perspective, the country to urbanization, all over the place. Not just young people, everybody. That demand for service, it simply means, how will you compete? How will you be relevant? And so the notion of mixed use as the magic elixir, in my view, is completely fallacious. If we sit back and we say, I got it, all we need to do on every piece of land that used to be a shopping center but is now obsolete is to build apartments and to build office and to put a hotel on it, There will be more failed mixed-use projects in this country in the next 10 years than you can imagine. It's exactly what happened to lifestyle centers 20 years ago. For those of you around in 1995, 97, everybody on the retail side said lifestyle centers are great. We overbuilt, we executed them poorly, many failed, and today the word lifestyle center is a bad word. Yet we've got a half a dozen, 10, 12 traditional lifestyle centers that are extremely productive. You know why? It depends on the real estate. And everything that we're talking about here today, in whatever business we're really referencing, has been disrupted, and it's about, from our perspective, building what's necessary for that particular community on a piece of real estate which hopefully has dense populations around it, with income around it, and most importantly, barriers to entry. If it's got those three things, I don't care if it's a super regional shopping center, or a grocery anchored shopping center, or a big mixed use project which demands higher rents because it costs a bunch more and takes a lot longer to effectively do, so it can only happen in a few places economically. That's the key. How to serve efficiently, as these guys both said, in the communities in which you're doing business.
Well, I'll start as the apartment guy. I feel like the odd guy out here a little bit, and say I want everyone to listen carefully to what Don said about putting apartments, not putting those into unused retail space. That's a very, very good piece of advice. So I'm going to take the question a little bit towards the technology side. I mean, our customers are unique because they actually contract with us and then they stay with us. They literally live with us. So we have a very intimate relationship with our customer, and they're very demanding of us. And we used to talk a lot about curb appeal and freeway access and things like that. And that's all been completely supplanted by the internet, whether it's used for sports scores. Now, 85% of our residents find us through the internet. 80% of our leases are signed online. Almost all our residents or prospects visit, though, the physical asset before they move in. But it is much more internet focused, and that's where our customer wants us to be. I mean, years ago, packages were not a big deal. Some of our properties, even 10 or 12 years ago, didn't have significant package rooms. They had mail rooms. Now, if you don't have a good package room, that can be a problem with a resident. We don't use lockers. We use these package rooms. But our joke is that Amazon can't put us out of business, but they can certainly bury us in packages. And we get everything delivered to us from entire, living rooms to 4 radial tires. I mean, we get that sort of stuff delivered. So you've got to be able to meet your resident, halfway or better. So again, how we find our prospects has changed. How we take care of them has changed. And this next step is, what do they want next? And I will say, without trying to make a pun, that to us, the door itself, the physical door, is key, because we need to figure out a way to retrofit in 300 buildings and 80,000 units, doors that are easily accessible by our residents, but still very secure, so that they can get their dog walkers in and out readily, do what the hotel chains have done, which we haven't done in the apartment industry for the most part, but do it in a way that we can replicate across the platform and do very efficiently. Because again, whether it's dog walkers, direct package delivery, there's a lot of interesting things that can be done once you control that access point. So again, for us, it's about technology and customer service in this very intimate relationship.
Okay, so I'm going to take it to the center of the room. Hopefully not a wrestling match here, but you both mentioned mixed use. Don, you were doing it early in the 90s, and certainly, as I mentioned, in 2000 with Santana Row, and then since then. And Conor, you mentioned it as well. I think it's been more recent for Kimco. Talk to me about how important, or to the group, how important mixed use is to your strategy going forward.
So I totally agree with Don that it's not.
Do we need to separate you? Okay.
It's not the silver bullet. And if you think mixed use is going to solve bad retail, it's not even going to solve mediocre retail. I think the key is understanding how to unlock the highest and best use of your real estate. And so at Kimco, what we have done is looked at every single one of our assets. And that's what's the beauty of our company is we have over 450 assets. So the raw material is ours to work. And so when we look at mixed use in the future, we understand that it's up to us to unlock that potential. And what we've called our signature series has been a dramatic way to invest in the existing portfolio. It's really the top 10 assets, transforming the top 10 assets of the company by adding sometimes multifamily, sometimes hotel, and it's making those super strong and high barrier to entry markets that much stronger. Those assets lend themselves to higher density because they're typically attached to public transportation. The beauty of our product, too, is that 70 to 80% of the real estate is typically just parking lots. And that's not generating any revenue for us. And so when you look at where Uber and Lyft and soon-to-be driverless cars and where we're headed, technology is going to have a dramatic impact on the parking ratio requirements. There's a reason why we have these big fields of parking. It's not because we love parking fields. It's because it's mandated by the municipality. And every time that parking ratio gets reduced, a piece of that parking lot becomes available to add density to it. And so when we look out 3, 5, 10 years, we've got a big pipeline of entitlement work that we're focused on. And that's really the starting gate, making sure that you understand that you've got to get to the entitlement phase so that you've actually added value to the asset. And then we go down a decision tree of how do we unlock that value. We've added the entitlements, now how do we unlock it? You can sell the entitlements and bring in an office developer, a multifamily developer, a hotel developer. You can ground lease it. Our first project back in 2016, we ground leased the apartments and took back the ground floor retail. That's really laying off the construction, development, and the lease up risk. You can joint venture it. You can bring in a lot of experts that are eager to try and build in the gateway cities, the top 20 markets where we're concentrated, because we're not making any more land, and typically we're the most underutilized parcel in those trade areas. We have not done it ourselves. We're not federal. We are not there yet, but our goal is to knock Don off the top, and so and we obviously are trying to be sure that we don't overload ourselves in terms of extending ourselves too much. We understand that bringing in the right joint venture partner is the right way to take a methodical approach to unlocking value. But we do believe that since we have the raw material, it's up to us to entitle it and to unlock that value and then set the pace of how much we want to take on, where our cost of capital is, how much capital do we want to dictate to mixed use, and that's what's really set our stage long term now that we're set to grow.
Yeah, well, in answering your question, Tom, mixed use is very important to us.
Right.
But it's not important to us, again, because it's the magic elixir. It's important to us because it intensifies real estate value. And if you, in our particular case, we've been around since 1962. So assets have been purchased in areas between Boston, Washington, D.C., Northern California, Southern California, a little bit in South Florida, for a long time. And you know what's happened to those places over a long time? They've intensified. Now, what we did when we bought those assets is what we said is we know how to bring people together. And so we used retail, broadly defined retail. Sometimes that means a grocer, sometimes that means a restaurant, sometimes that means entertainment and other uses. It means retail. Now, once you have them there, which, by the way, is not necessary. You know where mixed-use development is not necessary? Here, Manhattan. Because it is the environment's been created. There's nothing that has to happen on 57th and 5th to bring a lot of people there. They're coming. But when you look at the first-ring suburbs, and you have an expertise in bringing people together by using retail, then what do? And historically, our whole business has been caused by the investment bankers and investors in this room who said, just look very narrowly at one thing. If we wanted you to do apartments, you'd call him. If you want to do office, you'd call somebody else. Just do one thing. But what that does over time is make you pretty homogenous. And kind of doing that same thing means you hired a lot of the same people and all that. But if you look at it as a real estate professional, then the idea is, look, I got all these people here. Will the rents support construction costs of going up? And most importantly, from a mixed-use perspective, can office plus residential plus retail equal more than each of those things individually? Can 1 + 1 + 1 equal 4? And the answer is yes, but only in a few places where they are so integrated and so necessary that office rents exceed what somebody would pay outside, which is absolutely happening. We just signed Puma to their U.S. headquarters in just outside of Boston, Somerville, Massachusetts, at Assembly. Splunk, the big data software company in San Jose, they won't consider the suburban office parks any longer. Not everybody, of course, but those that need to be in and want that amenitized environment will pay up. They gotta pay up. You know why? This stuff takes a long time. It's more expensive. Land assemblage is harder. There's a whole bunch of those kind of things. But in those places where the economies pay, you'll get longer term growth rates, and most importantly, in not only this environment, but in the relevant environment of 2025, you'll still have earnings growth. And that's what we're all about, long-term earnings growth through cash flow increases.
I was going to go to you, but yes, go ahead.
You wanted to ask me direction?
Well, I wanted to, he's placemaking, he said not required in New York City. You have a different perspective?
Yeah. So Don said a lot of valuable things, and I want to just play off of just a bit of it, because I think it's important. I think the first thing you point on the public markets, because I think it's an important distinction in terms of forcing us to be narrow-minded, or companies to be narrow-minded as the world's changing. And for the students out here right now, I think there's probably no better time to be entering business, any business, but even the real estate, particularly the real estate business, because we've been behind the lens and the change that's about to happen. So bringing new perspective to the table is going to be a big advantage that you're going to have, that for those of us who've been in the business a long time may not be able to look as clearly through those lenses. But one of the reasons that we sold our company, our public company, in 2007 was a view that we saw the world changing, and we felt very constricted by the public markets to be able to adapt our strategy and have a much more flexible strategy when we were sort of being told that we're boxed in as a New York office company. And when we saw our customers' needs change, and we developed insights as to what our customers wanted, and we wanted to actually expand into new lines of businesses, we would be penalized, and our stock price would go down. And so even though we thought intuitively it was the right thing to do, you know, we're all competitive. You want your stock price to go up. That's your cost of capital, and it becomes self-reinforcing. So part of the rationale of selling at that time was a realization that you needed to be more flexible in the environment that we were about to experience, and be able to follow the changing needs of the customer and community, as Don said, right? And I think, and then the last panel, even in that discussion, understanding your customer leads you to the next innovation of what that customer needs. And you got to stay ahead of that curve. And that's what's exciting about this business, is staying ahead of that curve. One of the trends, going to the New York City comment, that I think is a little bit different, thinking about mixed use and all development from a no legacy assets, right? Starting in 2007, coming back in the market 2009. So now we're approaching it with not a legacy asset that I have to worry about. How do I reposition? How do I redevelop? How do I salvage value in a changing world? How would you approach things? And one of the things that you see is there's been a changing dynamic of how people live and work, right? And people used to work 9 to 5. I like to say they now work 5 to 9. And so there is a coming together of home life and work life. And you got to create environments that help cultivate that changing need, and the environment you really create is community. And one thing that mixed use does is it creates that community that people can work, they can go to restaurants, they see people at stores, they live by there, they walk the streets, and that sense of community is critical. And that sense of community, by the way, is true in our office buildings in places in New York City too, where we get higher rents, in places where we're able to create the right curation of uses in terms of retail, restaurants, programming, amenities, that make people feel that they're part of a community, that they come outside of their office doors to congregate and come together, collaborate, innovate, socialize, and they stay with us longer than they otherwise would stay with us. Same with on our multifamily portfolio that we have, in terms of people wanting to live in a place that they can walk down, go to the local bar, go to the local coffee shop, walk the streets, get on public transportation. So that sense of community to me is probably when you think about when we're talking about mixed use, it's the glue that helps bring customer and community together. And if you're using technology or whatever innovations you're doing, you want to further enhance that offering, whether it's in a place like New York City in the CBD in those buildings, or, which I completely agree, to make destinations when you get outside of the metropolitans like New York City.
Just to build on that, because I think that's very well said. I mean, we talk about, and we're a 97% income of our income is apartment income. So we're not in any way really in the mixed use business, but the most important amenity in our buildings is the neighborhood around it. It's the ability, again, to leave and access excellent retail, access cultural amenities, transit options, and the like. So when we think about neighborhoods, whether it's the dense suburban portfolio or the urban portfolio, which is really the entirety of the company, we do think a lot about that. And especially if we venture into the suburbs, we're very focused on nearby, drive to, walk to, close by, dense created downtown options in places like a Bethesda, as opposed to being further out where we see less of that. And we just think that lack of density makes returns just demonstrably lower for apartments over time.
Scott, can you talk a little bit, let's maybe a little New York centric, but talk about the impact of technology here in New York, and then I'm going to follow that up with, I think you'll have a terrific perspective on this, and hopefully you're comfortable talking about it, the Amazon decision to come and then to leave.
Sure.
So technology first, impact.
Right, so, the technology industry in New York, the way I've always liked to frame technology back from 2009 or 10 when we began to say, as a strategy, we want to invest heavily in New York City and all of the markets. And why did we say that? Because we said, New York is in an idea-based economy, the most important ingredient is talent, and New York's a magnet for talent. And if you go back and think about technology, pure technology, when it was innovating new technological devices or things like the iPhone, that's where Silicon Valley played ahead, right? That's where they had the engineers, that's where they drove it. But we've now come to a maturation in technology. It's not about the technology, it's how do you apply the technology. It's about applied sciences. And if you're applying technology, you need to have industry-specific expertise to be able to understand what the problem is, what the friction is, and how you're going to ultimately use technology to solve that problem. And there's no better market than New York because we have such a diversity of industries that are here and expertise here that ultimately can do that. And that was something actually under Mike Bloomberg coming out of the of 9/11. He began to make a big push on positioning New York for applied sciences. He didn't even call it technology, called it applied sciences, and built the Cornell Technion and other ventures with NYU. Got to make sure we get NYU in there. But it's driven this, and it's proven itself out that it's made New York really attractive for companies that want that talent. And we've created this self-reinforcing cycle in New York where talent has attracted companies, companies have attracted talent, and it's something that has now led to record levels of job growth, population growth, tourism. All the best and brightest people around the world want to come to New York. And we've had this terrific momentum with Google growing here, with Facebook growing here, with Apple growing, every major company, but even the financial service firms, the consumer product firms, they're all here because they need the technology. When our tenants are growing, we're signing leases in our commercial space with companies that are commercial tenants, but basically it's data scientists that are filling the space. That's the areas where they're growing their businesses the most right now. And so it's a very interesting dynamic, and I think we have a very strong self-reinforcing cycle that's going to continue to carry itself because companies like Google, like Disney, even financial like JP Morgan have planted seeds of growth in New York and building new headquarters that are going to be 5-10 years out of delivering more space here, which means they're going to put more of their workforce here in this marketplace. Do you want me to jump to Amazon?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so Amazon. Amazon, was interesting. If we were sitting here and Amazon never even chose New York, we wouldn't be having this discussion, right? Because if people asked me when they were looking for space, if they were going to choose New York, I would say unlikely they'll choose New York. I had, Virginia was on the list of places like that, but New York wasn't one of the ones. But they chose New York, and New York, in classic fashion, blew it. But for us, it was, in New York when Amazon put out the contest, the state and the city said, we would ask the development community and civic community to come together and form groups to choose where you want to support. What is the best case? So there was Long Island City, there was Hudson Yards, there was Brooklyn, there was Grand Central, there was Lower Manhattan, where consortiums were formed to come forward and put forward a plan. we were part of the Long Island City Consortium, and one of my colleagues, Seth Pinsky, who used to be head of economic development, was leading the drafting of the pitch for Long Island City. So we really felt Long Island City was the right location for Amazon. And the reason being is if you look at the master plan for Long Island City, it had the transportation, it has all of the residential housing, and it was always planned to have a big commercial use, and Citibank started and sort of never really took off, but that's where the next step was gonna be. So it was always the long-term vision to have that big commercial use. And Amazon ran this great contest, and we win in New York, and instead of getting the parade, we got protests. And I think, it's a lesson of how challenging developing in places like New York is, because it requires leadership that isn't amenable to sort of just top down. It's like you just can't play the air game and get the key elected officials to sign off on something, no matter how good it is, without playing the ground game and getting all the people locally to understand and have their voices heard, and whether they agree 100% or not agree, at least feel part of the process and have been brought under the tent. And I've been involved in a lot of public projects in my days of public service, and generally speaking, I will say that people like the governor's office and the mayor's office, they know that. And they generally, before we do a big move, an announcement of a new airport or whatever, they get all the stakeholders. They play that ground game. But because Amazon was so focused on being quiet and confidential, they never got ahead of that. And then by the time they did get ahead of it, the vocal minority, some of which frankly wasn't even from New York, and a lot of it was union-based, came out and built a very strong campaign against Amazon. And there was a lot of misinformation as to not that Amazon's creating $27 billion of revenue and 25,000 to 40,000 jobs, but we're giving $3 billion away, of which $2.5 billion was, as of right, anyone would have gotten the $2.5 billion. So, and so Amazon didn't do a good job themselves. They didn't have anyone in New York for the first 2 weeks on the ground. They made a big part of this, which to me was a little bit tone deaf, about Jeff Bezos getting a helipad in Long Island City. Not a great way to sort of tell the story. I mean, I think he should have had the helipad, but I would have done it after the deal was closed. But you're not going to win over people in this current environment where there's this sense of inequality and the sense that there's the haves and have-nots if you don't go out and really build that case. And that's really what was unfortunate that happened. And I met with a couple of city council members earlier today, and we were talking about when they went to City Hall, and they were chastised as if they were the enemy of the state when they came to the hearings at City Hall. If anyone watched on TV, it was horrifying. And I saw email traffic right after that from Amazon to some of my colleagues in Virginia, and I think that was it. I think that the way they were treated at that moment made them think, take everything else aside, I think made them think that we're just never going to be really welcomed here for that type of project. Now, that all being said, and I'll end with this, they're growing in New York. So the loser here, unfortunately, is New York City, and particularly Long Island City. The loser is good economic development and good sense of urban planning, because Long Island City would have thrived, and next to one of our largest public housing projects that we had in New York would have created a tremendous amount of jobs and had a tremendous spillover effect. But now they're going to grow in our more mature markets in Manhattan, which they already are, and they're just going to take space in places that would be good for Manhattan, but not necessarily drive the same level of economic revitalization as they would have in Long Island City.
If I can just add on to that, Scott, and that is fascinating from the inside. I'd love to grab a beer or two and really get the inside story how that went
Live
down.
through telling it again.
But it's interesting when you think about growth in real estate value and how real estate value is going to grow. You need an economy that has more and better jobs. I mean, if you're going to cut through it all, more and better jobs. And I think when you look at some of the markets in the country, when we if you look in technology markets in particular, for obvious reasons, you look at Northern California, you can get your head around allocating capital for the long term there. If you look in Boston with what's happening with medical technology there, you can get your head around it. Washington, D.C. has been very flat for the past 7 or 8 years, certainly on the retail side, and actually on the apartment side, we see the same thing, because really since the beginning of sequestration, on the government side, in 2011 or whenever that was, it has really put a wet blanket on what was happening there. And for an economy that had a growing federal government for decades that supported that growth there. That was kind of over. Boy, did Northern Virginia want Amazon. And boy, from a company who has 30% of our assets, either on the Maryland side or the Virginia side in the first ring suburbs outside of Washington, D.C., it was a godsend because I couldn't tell you before that Amazon announcement why there would be better, more and growing jobs in that metropolitan area. I think it's huge. And I do think it was really short-sighted on Amazon's part, frankly, for the way they handled it coming in, and certainly for the communities, from the community side.
I just want to add one thing, just again, for the students out here and for us, I think one of the big risks we have as an industry, frankly, is government and leadership, right? Because I think we're all talking about pace of change. And we're even having a hard time as business leaders keeping up with the pace of change. Being involved in government, watching how slow bureaucracies actually adapt, and how the way that the solution has gotten more and more about divisive politics, both on the right and the left, makes you fearful that we're not going to be equipped to address the changes that are needed in regulatory form or economic incentive form for businesses to be able to adapt and ultimately help job train people as inequality occurs in that mix. Think about re-innovating how we do things. What's the new rules in terms of autonomous vehicles on our road? How do we deal with things like the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world, or the shared hospitality or short-term rentals on the apartment side? All these issues are coming our way, and the natural reaction of elected officials is to hit the brakes and stop progress. And the natural reaction of these bureaucracies is to think they're still in the 20th century rather than try to think about how to get to the 21st century. And so, I think all, as business leaders and those looking for careers, the more that we can get people that are thinking forward, or forward-thinking, and try to push for those changes, because they're nuanced, they're not easy, they're not going to be said in a tweet or a headline. We need to do that because it's a big risk. And I'll tell you, in New York, we're seeing it. I mean, we just passed a budget that was a $175 billion budget, and we literally had people up in Albany for the last 2 weeks because there were things that would have crippled our economy had we not been able to communicate those challenges to legislators that were moving full speed ahead because that's what they were told by their political constituents they wanted. And so I just think it is more than ever, it's something that we need to be very sensitive to.
Great. Mark, I'm going to start with you, and I think each of you are doing this, and that is investing into some form of technology platforms or technology companies. Do you mind sharing with us some of those, the types of investments that perhaps you're making and what you hope that achieves?
Sure. So it's relatively small scale, but we're invested in two PE funds that are real estate focused. And we intentionally chose general real estate PE funds, not apartment PE funds, because we wanted to learn from just all real estate technology. What's been great is just hearing the ideas, because they just have a great snorkel. They see a lot of good ideas out there, and we're on their boards, and so we get to see those ideas as well. So I don't know that necessarily we'll make a fortune on the actual investments, but I think the ideas that come through the system, already a couple of them we've adopted, and by us adopting them with our 80,000 units, we sort of make that business. So it's a very good arrangement. We've made a couple of small investments as well, really at almost the angel level, at the very beginning level, in some technologies that we've liked, including ways to communicate better with our residents. So we're pretty excited about all of that, but we're not, to be honest, trying to transform into a technology company. We're trying to integrate some of these technological advances into our operating business and then scale them up.
So let me tell you about something we did last year that's eye-opening in a lot of respects. So over retail. There's too much retail in the United States. Got it. The internet's going to kill retail. I fully understand it. Got it. So with that dialogue, guess what businesses pop up all over the place? Consultants. Technology consultants love to effectively sell their services, and they're certainly doing it to retailers who are spending lots and lots of money trying to identify who their customer is, where to find that customer, what that customer is likely to spend, et cetera. And all the retailers who have any chance of figuring out how to survive and thrive in the future certainly need to understand their customer and their customer spending experiences better than they did yesterday, in fact, better than they do today. And there's lots of consulting firms out there trying to help them. From the real estate side, we had to say, well, okay, how do we want to play in that? And certainly from a negotiation perspective, the idea of knowing everything that every particular retail knows was not really a practical way to go about it. So what we did is we formed a group of about 6 people, and we took a look at 7 individual data gathering companies, some selling services on the consulting side, some effectively technical companies in Silicon Valley and Southern California and Pasadena for their purposes, for the purpose of us capitalizing them. Would we own 20%, 40%, 90%, some part of those companies? They were all, as you would imagine, arms wide open. Come on in, let me talk to you. And so we took 6 months, and we saw 7 CEOs, operating people, technologists, et cetera, trying to understand what it is that they were doing to be able to better serve retailers. And the bottom line was, most of these companies, we are in the nascent stages here, very early, and lots of data exists, but how to effectively use it and how to effectively get a better deal as a landlord in a negotiation for a lease, not so clear. So we haven't concluded one way or the other yet, but I know that what's happening, there is that panic effectively of, oh gosh, I have to do something. And so lots of hiring of consultants, lots of information gathering happening out there, but the real key is what the retailers are doing. Far more, in my view, than what the landlords will effectively, ultimately do there. Each of those retailers are crafting the data that they need for their particular products, and it's all different.
So I agree with a lot what was said earlier. One of the things that we've been doing for a long time now, I lived in the Bay Area for a number of years, is using our real estate to help innovators with their proof of concept. And so rather than making a direct investment in the technology, because technology is changing so fast, and you're not sure if it's going to be utilized today, tomorrow, or at all, we thought, why not partner with these incubators, with these startups, and say, look, we can help you monetize your idea and give you the insights of what we find valuable, but let us use it for free and guide you through that process of where the value is so you can take it and scale it. And so that's what we've done for 10 years now. And it's interesting. It's still very early, as Don said. There are some things that I think are impactful that we have used to get some leases done, most notably with Target, to understand where their shopper is, and they do their sales forecasts very well. They have their own system where they're trying to figure out where they're serving, and sometimes it's not accurate, and sometimes we can use the data that we have been able to partner with some of these operators to show them that, hey, what you thought was your market share in this area where the cannibalization might hurt certain stores, it's actually not going to happen. And it played out for us nicely just recently where they did a deal with us, and it's actually been outperforming our expectations and theirs as well. So there's so many different companies out there that are doing a lot of different unique things. A lot of it's focused on traffic. It's focused on pedestrian as well as vehicular traffic. Trade areas is something that's really interesting because we've been using the same 3-5 mile rings for decades, and everybody knows there's no such thing as a trade area that's a perfect circle. And understanding your trade area, I think, is extremely powerful, not only for your internal portfolio, but for capital allocation purposes. So that's where we've been focused, because we really do believe that there is some serious advantage of understanding data and trying to get ahead of it before others actually are able to harness it.
So we've approached it in 2 ways. We have a prop tech and innovation fund, and we have a RXR innovation lab. The fund we make investments out of, in the lab we try to stand up business concepts ourselves that we directly want to own. It's really 3 areas that we're focused on both accounts. One is creating a better customer experience, and what are the types of products and services that we can be either investors of or own that create that better customer experience. The second is how do we optimize utilization of our fixed assets? So how do we think about driving more revenue opportunities out of our fixed assets by taking more innovative approaches to that, whether that's thinking about shared hospitality, short-term rental, co-working, and or shared office space as concepts, or a bunch of others that are like that. And the third is how do we operate our business more efficiently? And so, generally as we make investments, we're making investments in businesses that we think help in those regards, and similarly I think Mark said it, that we then will test drive and start utilizing those products ourselves, and the more that we utilize those products, obviously it becomes a little self-fulfilling, the better chance they'll be successful. We also profile those companies that we like to our investor base, and we have $8.5 billion of institutional investors that themselves have enormous direct real estate holdings that then also the hope is that they'll be adopters for the ones that we want to pursue. We don't typically do that on the customer-facing products, and the reason being is we're still the early stages of the evolution of these new companies, and a lot of these new companies are going to go through a period of creative destruction. There's going to be a very small percentage that actually win. And so what we don't want to do is be putting in front of our customer companies or gathering data about our customers with companies that might fail. And a lot of these companies, frankly, are pursuing similar business strategies, and maybe the 20% is the innovation part of the risk, and 80% is the normal risk of starting a business, which for anyone who started a business knows is a pretty big risk. So we think we try to avoid that, and that's the stuff we build and own ourselves, and a lot of that is data analytics driven, and then creating service offerings around those data analytics. And then the back of the house type stuff is also where again, we're comfortable in making investments into third parties and trying it out ourselves.
All right, I've been told I'm done, but I'm going to go over and extend it 30 seconds. You have 10 seconds. Evaluate. This is easy. No, you can do this. Evaluate the performance of the public companies since you've exited.
I mean, I think it's hard. There's so many trends. You guys have all heard it here today, whether capital flows, who's the owner. I think the biggest challenge of a public company in a really quickly dynamic changing economic environment is to be able to change if the public markets don't let you do that. And I think some have been successful, but I would say there's the top 3 to 5% that are able to convince the public shareholders to let them change. But I think the 95% have been running their business as they ran their business 10, 20 years ago. And if my view of the world is, within 10 years, a lot of them are going to be competitively obsolete because of that.
All right, this is it. So Don, hopefully you can do this in 20 seconds. Tell what is a 5-tool player, and how do these students become a 5-tool player?
That reference that I made, because I love baseball, that reference was about really federal not going all in on anything. And I think that's really important. There is an unpredictability in the future of today that is higher because of that pace of change than it's ever been. So why go all in? If we play poker together, I want to have more. I want to have arrows in that quiver that can work no matter what it is I do. Whether we're talking about tenant-based diversity, income stream with apartments and office diversity all the way through, and that's basically what I was referring to there, Tom.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody.